All right, so the title of my thesis is The Solace of Gray, Yogic Perspectives on Healing Through Complex Trauma. The topic of this work can be triggering for some, myself included, so feel free to do whatever is needed to take care of yourself. If that looks like bringing awareness to your feet being grounded, taking a sip of water, getting up and walking around, lying on the ground, petting a dog, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, please feel free to do so. So in my thesis, I talk about CPTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what is this? So with acute PTSD, we can typically pinpoint one event of trauma. There is a way an individual was before they endured that trauma, and there's a way they are after. With complex PTSD, there is multiple events of trauma or prolonged or chronic exposure to traumatic event. So the individual may not have had the chance to even develop into who they are. They share the same core symptoms. There is a re-experiencing of the events of trauma, typically through nightmares or flashback. There is avoidancy of people, events, things that remind one of that trauma. And there is a perceived sense of threat, typically through hypervigilance or an increased startle response. With CPTSD, we see additional symptoms of affect or emotional dysregulation. So there is difficulty either tapping into one's emotions, they may be entirely suppressed, or there is an overwhelming flooding of uncontrollable emotions. There's a negative view of oneself and of one's life. They may view the world as unsafe. They may view their body as unsafe. And we see disturbances in interpersonal relations because a lot of the times with complex trauma, the trauma occurs between two individuals. So there could be difficulty in trusting others. When a nervous system is exposed to an event of trauma, it reacts in one of two ways of hypoarousal or hyperarousal, sometimes even both at the same time. So when we feel grounded and stable and secure within ourselves, we feel able to engage with the world around us. We feel connected. This is what is known as being within our window of tolerance. So with repeated events of trauma, our window of tolerance actually shrinks. The individual is more likely to be thrown into these extremes of hypoarousal or hyper. So hypoarousal at the bottom of this wave of dysregulation is when the nervous system tends to get stuck on off. A very severe presentation of this may be that the individual actually collapses and shuts down to the point of where they become unconscious or experience a tonic immobility where the muscles of the body become paralyzed. So it's a very extreme reaction to a life threat. Less severe presentation, this can show as depression, as chronic fatigue. This is a freeze response. The individual may experience dissociation, which is a disconnect from oneself, a disconnect from memories, emotions, disconnect from reality. At the top of this wave of dysregulation is hyperarousal. This is our sympathetic flight or fight response. So this may portray as anxiety or panic, and chronic pain may be present because muscles are constantly tensed in preparation to run or to fight. So part of using yoga practices is to be able to help widen the window of tolerance again. We are inviting the individual to step into a parasympathetic state of rest and repair. And we are also giving them tools to be able to better tolerate triggers as they arise. Where dissociation is a disconnect from oneself, yoga is connection back to self. Following this definition of yoga as union of individual consciousness with universal consciousness, a bridging of body, mind, soul, psyche, breath, coming to step into a place between realms, between physical and spiritual, between object and subject, between immaterial and material, coming to sit in a space of self-realization. Trauma-sensitive yoga is a specific modality of yoga that was curated for the purpose of being used as support for CPTSD. So it incorporates these qualities. There's choice, so the individual can participate how they wish. They could leave their eyes open during Shavasana if that's a trigger for them. They can do the practice in a chair or standing. There's the availability for resourcing. So resourcing through the physical senses, orienting, grounding, Also find an internal resource in. There's increased body awareness. So view in sensations of the body in absence of judgment and welcome in all that arises. Ability to breathe connection back with one's body, connection with people in the room, with one's environment. The ability to regulate both on levels of the nervous system and on emotions. Acceptance of all that is present. Ultimately, this is all leading towards a felt sense of safety. Bessel van der Kolk helped to conduct a study where trauma-sensitive yoga was used for a group of women with chronic PTSD. And they participated in one class per week, a 1 hour long class for 10 weeks. What this study found was that after just the 8-week mark, so 8 hours of trauma-sensitive yoga, more than half of the participants no longer met the diagnostic criteria for CPTSD. And this was a diagnosis they have had for at least 3 years, if not for decades. And it was treatment resistant. So traditional talk therapy and medication did not show improvement for these individuals. And after 8 hours of trauma-sensitive yoga, more than half no longer had symptoms anymore. So this is quite profound. This goes to show how yoga is a holistic modality. It seems to incorporate something that is missing in traditional talk therapy. Yoga utilizes both bottom-up and top-down approaches, being able to access states of the mind through the body, being able to access the body through states of the mind, through imagination and metaphor, reframing cognitive distortions. Traditional talk therapy can typically bring up a risk of re-traumatization. So an individual knows very well what has happened to them. Talking about the trauma could be powerful to build a personal narrative, but a lot of the times it leads to a reliving of that trauma or just a symptom of dissociation. And there's only so much can be accomplished during session if the individual is not present with themselves or if it's too overwhelming for their nervous system. So yoga can provide the tools to be able to sit with the triggers as they arise and to sit with oneself. When we reduce the risk of re-traumatization, we increase the probability of healing. The original intent of psychotherapy was to step into the depths of the psyche. It was to make the unconscious conscious. And this is in line with Carl Jung's transpersonal psychology, exploring that which lies beyond the human experience. So reaching into places where we see beyond where the eyes can see and hear beyond where the ears can hear. Jung spoke of the soul as a ligament connecting these two realms of physical and spiritual, immaterial and material. His idea of the collective unconscious says that we are all a drop of the same intrinsic ocean, but also within every single drop contains the entire ocean in itself. So this is very similar to the yogic state of samadhi, or complete absorption in the absolute. It is a space where we are able to bring the stars down to earth and find a sense of groundedness up in the sky. Transcendental phenomenology is a field in philosophy that further steps into this place between subject and object, coming to meet a pure subjectivity. We begin in a state of wholeness. Our innate nature involves consciousness itself, and from there manifest these levels of psyche, soul, mind, body. When we take on the role of a philosopher, we are questioning. We are inviting ourselves into spaces of curiosity and just inquiring within ourselves, what is present? Can we be curious about what is there? And having that mindset of questioning can help to reframe, rewrite, and recreate how one relates to themselves, to the world around them. Trauma exists as an existential wound. So trauma is spoken through the body. It speaks through the mind as psychiatric disorder, but trauma is housed somewhere a bit deeper. It is a wound on the psyche. It is in that space of gray between realms where we have fertile ground for healing, where we have both the trauma and the healing at the same time, where we need darkness in order to come to understand light. We can recognize that we are both the reflector and that which is reflected, both perceiver and perceived. We sit in a space of pure perception. Advaita Vedanta is a non-dualistic philosophy in yoga, and it says that the core of being is made up of these attributes of Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat is existence or ultimate truth. Chit is consciousness or pure awareness. And Ananda is bliss. So these are not attributes that we have, but these are what we are. We are the connotation of existence. We are consciousness in itself, and we are the notion of bliss. I like to say that trauma uncovery is a Plutonian journey, Pluto being the planet in astrology that represents the power of transformation. This is where we take darkness and transmute it into light, where a caterpillar literally dissolves itself into goo in order to grow wings to soar, where a star literally crashes into itself in order to be born. We enter into this intermediate space where we find trauma as fertile ground for healing, where destruction is able to breed into creation. From adversity, we gain fortitude. The invitation to step into that space between is yoga. When coming back home to oneself, this is not just ending at the physical body. We come to find an embodiment that radiates across these levels of physicality, psychology, emotionality, intuition, energy, spirituality, coming to stand as one integrated being. So a term that I find much more fitting is embodiment, which I define as coming to find home within one's skin. And I would like to read a quote from my book. So my thesis is published as a book. Well, all right. In the aftermath of traumatic events, trees in the forest of one's soul may obtain scarcity across their branches. A drizzle of light faintly passes through the empty space where leaves of life are supposed to be, like a star attempting to shine through overcast. The trauma survivor is cloaked by a darkness that almost appears brighter than light in its blinding quality. There is a pressure of a storm cloud, heavy with the rain that never falls. The survivor becomes crushed between realms, unsure of where indwellment wants to pull them. They drink melancholia with each inhalation. It is somehow enough sustenance to stay solid, feeling a frozenness that seems as though it will not ever melt. So my thesis and book is a mix of research, personal narrative, and paintings. So I have my paintings up here, and I have a few in person as well, if anyone would like to look at them after. So paintings go to show how art can speak in ways where words fall too short. So I can give a short explanation for these, but I also invite you to just kind of absorb your own interpretation. This one speaks to how my body kind of compartmentalizes trauma. So the left side of my body feels this sense of decay and a lack of presence. This one speaks to how, again, from destruction, we can find creation. Speaking to Saturnine states, so Saturnine is a word that kind of translates as gloomy and dreary and melancholic. And really gray can be so infinitely colorful. It is a space of balance and neutrality, wholeness, centeredness. This one speaks to a sense of fossilization that I feel. It's almost as though I'm coming forth through life from places that have died, as though parts of me have been preserved and they're now thawing from a much too far prolonged free state. This one is called Inner Resource. And then this one was my final in Hatha Yoga, speaking to this assimilation of white and black, darkness and light, sun and moon, masculine, feminine, all come into sublate where we find not only gray, but again, an entire spectrum of color. I have one more line I would like to read. Maybe one experiences trauma for the same reason the sky is black. It provides a canvas for stars to shine. Thank you. She's so confused by the glasses. I get pepped up.
Introduce.
This is Kokiri. I can't see anyone on the screen, but this is Kokiri. Good service pop. My book is available on Amazon. Shameless self promo. If you just search The Solace of Gray by xyloh gargiulo.
And it's a beautiful read. It truly, truly is amazing.
And this is for you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.